Another round of applause for Steve, everyone. Keeping things moving, next up we have Merril Fernando, Senior Product Manager for Azure AD at Microsoft. Thank you, Merril.
Thanks, Steve. Hey folks, my name is Merril Fernando. Steve, I think you and I would have been working at Telstra at the same time. I was working on sort of the internal identity side of things. So I'm a relative newcomer as well. I'm just 3 years in identity at Microsoft. And I'm going to talk to you about the ACSC Essential 8 MFA, just the MFA pillar. So at the end of this 15-20 minutes, I hope to be able to share with you everything about, like, you'll be able to go away with the what the maturity levels mean for MFA. You'll get a good understanding of that, and also you'll know what a customer needs to do to move through those maturity levels, and you know what are the authenticator types that are allowed and not allowed. Right, so just do that. Which button? Oh. Right. So before I continue on, so we published, as Microsoft, we work with the ACSC in publishing guidance for all of our customers on how to implement the Essential 8 maturity models in the organization. And I've worked on the MFA, just the pillar. There are 8 pillars in total. I worked on the MFA pillar. We published it in the Microsoft Service Portal. You can get the white paper. We're working on an updated guide, which should be out sometime this month, which is sort of our V2, which will be in the Microsoft Docs. Right. I usually hang out on Twitter and Mastodon, so feel free to follow me there. Right. The way I explain the maturity models to my customers is I use the example of maturity level is you're having a tent, right? You're not protected a lot from the environment, the different factors. It's overall a very weak security posture that you might have when it comes to MFA in the org. Maybe you might not even have MFA, rolled out in the organization, not necessarily for everyone. When you come to maturity level 1, this is where you do have MFA rolled out across, all of your user base, but the protection that you have is more to protect yourself from opportunistic adversaries, right? So these are people who can use standard password spray attacks, and they're just running this, finding out which orgs are weak in their posture and then coming in. Then you get to maturity level 2, which tries to protect you from folks who are trying to target your company or your customer and trying to get users to click on a link, have some sort of maybe phishing links that just target the CEOs and high-level targets. So that's where maturity level tries to protect you from those sort of actors and attacks. And those adversaries are, they know to use those tools well, the type of tools that are commonly available outside. Then you come to maturity level 3, which tries to protect you from things like folks like nation states, people who are using tools and attack vectors which are not publicly available, which are not common knowledge to everyone, but so they're using those sorts of attack vectors. So that's what the ACSC sort of gives the guidance on what their maturity levels mean and what sort of protection they're trying to get to through that. Now, when it comes to authentication, in the Essential 8, there are 2 big parts of the MFA authentication. The first one is what I have on the slide here, which is what sort of authentication level can be used at each maturity level. Then the next one we'll look at is what channels the users need to come from, or the scope of users who need to be coming in from. Right, so a company that's having passwords, right, as sort of the allowing single factor authentication, just username and password. Maybe it's not applied across the board to all of the users. You would class them as maturity level 0, right, where you have a mix of, some people can still get in with just username and password, right, and maybe MFA is applied, but it's not globally applied to all of the users. So that at that level, you're at maturity level in terms of the authenticator type that you're using. When it comes to maturity level 1, you have MFA applied across the company for, whether you're coming in from the internal network or from outside. as long as you're accessing applications that are over the internet, you're applying MFA, but you can use almost any type of authenticator, right? So at maturity level 1, it doesn't define what is allowed and what's not allowed. You can use any type of MFA option. You can use voice, SMS. You can use the authenticator apps. You can use FIDO2, Hello for Business. Any of those options are valid. When it comes to maturity level 2, you cannot use phone and SMS. So when you are maturing up to maturity level 2, or you want to say you want to get to maturity level 2 for MFA, you are no longer able to use voice and SMS. Now, it's sort of not clearly spelled out by the ACSC, but if you go look in the NIST reference, which is what the ACSC aligns with, the NIST authenticator levels, those two cannot be used. If you want to use them, you need to do a lot of controls in place. For example, your user shouldn't be allowed to change their SIM number from one phone to the other. There are lots of risk factors, mitigations that you need to put in place, which is not really easy for you to enforce with the technologies we have today. So because of that, the SMS and voice are basically not supposed to be used at maturity level 2. So maturity level 2, you can use everything other than SMS and voice. You can use any sort of authenticator app. You can use the Microsoft Authenticator passwordless, and so on. And then you come to maturity level 3. So I made a mistake there. Microsoft Authenticator shouldn't be there in this maturity level 3. That should be a maturity level 2. I was doing it last minute and sending it to you. Yeah, so that shouldn't be there. It's supposed to be phishing resistant. So as the others were explaining, it has to be phishing resistant, which has to be a hardware backed thing for maturity level 3. So you can use Hello for Business with a TPM chip, you can use FIDO2 security keys, and you can use smart cards with the cert-based auth. Right, so those are the options. That it's definitely not there in my next set of slides. Right, so the first one is what sort of authenticator you can use as you go through those maturity levels. Then we look at the scope of users, right? So maturity level 0, you have these different groups of users. So you have privileged users in your org. These are people who have admin access in the org. Organization user is just any standard staff member or even guests who come into your tenant. Now you have these network zones defined because that comes into play in the maturity levels, right? So you have a local network zone, which is your local network, and you have the internet zone. Now most of the maturity level for ACSCs for internet-facing applications, right? So at the initial levels, it's only about internet-facing apps. So if you have apps like SaaS applications like M365, anything that's hosted in the cloud, that's available for users over the internet, then you need to consider this, where their user is accessing it from, right? So at maturity level 2, you can have a mix of maturity level 0, customers can be using single factor or MFA, so they could have a mix of things. When someone is accessing your app over the internet, no VPN, they're just directly accessing. Again, you can have a mix of single factor or multi-factor. Users accessing internal applications, things that are legacy apps, maybe doing RDP to backend servers, they're still using single factor or multi-factor. Now in the Essential 8, they also have a scope for consumers, customer users. So these are kind of consumer identities, right? So if you're building a product, like the MyTelstra app is a good example, you have end users who are customers of the company signing in. That customer sign-in is also one that's defined in the ACSC. So maturity level 0 is sort of a mix. You don't have MFA enforced, you have a mix of single factor or multi-factor. And you can use any sort of authenticate app. Let's just call it at the bottom. Okay, so when you go to maturity level 2, now a user who is accessing these applications, whether they are on the network or they are outside the network, MFA is required. So you cannot have any user signing in without an MFA option, right? So even if they're on the network, even if they're connected to the VPN, it doesn't really matter. The user has to use an MFA sign in before they can access the application. So that that's the change, the flip that happens, and it's sort of the hardest shift for most companies, right? Because they need to make sure everybody has MFA set up. There's huge process that you need to go through when you try to get to that initial maturity level 1. To access your internal applications, it is recommended, but it's not a requirement. So if you have servers and apps that are only on the VPN, they're not internet facing, you don't need to, it's not a requirement for them to be protected with MFA, right? So that's an optional step there. So this is usually the hardest step, but one of my customers, they were doing this, right? So they've gone to maturity level 1 and they were like, why am I seeing less prompts now? I'm expecting to see more prompts. But the neat thing is when you do MFA everywhere, the claims that you get on your Windows device, on your desktop, when you sign in with the MFA claim, that claim stays on. So the user, when they're signing in, they already have the MFA claim, whether they're on the network or not. So they actually end up seeing less MFA prompts. So it is actually a win for users sometimes when you do that, right? But the hard bit is making sure everybody in the org has MFA and all of that set up, and support teams have it. Now for consumer accounts at maturity level 1, the MFA option should be turned on by default, but the consumer can turn it off if they want to. So that's the only difference there. You should give them an MFA option. So again, maturity level 1, any MFA option can be used, any of those authenticators. Right, now we come to maturity level 2. So here it stays the same, MFA everywhere whether you're on the network or not. The change in maturity level 2 is for non-privileged users. Again, it is optional, but when it comes to your privileged users, these are people who might be admins on Azure, on AWS, sort of backend systems that they are privileged accounts. Some companies have like a secondary identity for those users. Those users, even if they're accessing on-prem applications, you have to use MFA. So you might say if you need to RDP to a server to do some backend things, you have to have MFA for those user flows where the privileged user is coming in, right? So that's one of the biggest changes at maturity level 2. And for consumer, there is no difference at maturity level 2. So the big difference here from the authenticator types, and this is a big jump for most customers, is to remove SMS and voice. Because everyone is used to SMS voice, they have it as a backup. They don't need to worry if they move between phones, they just take the SIM, put the SIM in the other one, and they can sign in. When you remove those two, you need to make sure your support teams, your help desk, they're all equipped to help your customers, the users, manage those things, and you know how they can go and set it up. They need to remember to move the authenticators into the new phone before they wipe the old phone, and there is some user training that's usually involved, right? So that's usually another big step up. That's the hardest part of the whole maturity level 2 rollout. Then we come to maturity level 3. Now, most of those things from maturity level 2 stay the same. But here the big difference is if you have important or secure data on-prem, maybe it's a data warehouse that has confidential customer information. Now, ACSC doesn't really define it. They just say important data repository. So you can come up with your own list of what is important, which apps need to be protected, and then you can define that those apps you need to implement MFA. So it's you doing your own assessment on what is important there. And privileged users, of course, you would have done it with maturity level 2. So maturity level 3, and yeah, I've crossed it out. The Authenticator app is not phishing resistant, so that's not allowed as well. Even with passwordless, Microsoft Authenticator passwordless, we do implement some additional controls to make sure it's not jailbroken and lots of other things, but it is still not phishing resistant, right? So something to be aware of. You have to use only, you can only use hardware-backed tokens there, which can be Hello for Business, but Hello for Business doesn't work on mobiles as well, right? So that's tied only to the desktop, but you can get there. So the key message with all of this, and I'm done with all of my slides, the key message that ACSC has and what we have is, it's for customers, is that don't try to get to ML3 right at the beginning, right? Like, don't try to boil the ocean and just get to ML3. Look where you are, assess where you are. It's a journey. Try to get to that point. And even with the authentication options, don't wait till ML3 to do Hello for Business. You can start rolling out Hello for Business and training your users. So it's about trying to get wins in wherever you can to improve your posture. And that's what the ACSC wants as well. They want people to assess where they are and have sort of a guidance to sort of move to the next level and improve from where they are to get to the next point. Cool. I hope that was useful.
4 minutes and 34 seconds for questions for Merril.
Just one question.
Yeah.
What about this consumer applications where the internet user access? Do we need anything?
The consumer accessing what?
Because there's a back-end side of that consumer applications as well.
Yeah.
Where does it sit into that? They would be considered as an MFA as well, right?
Yeah, so are you talking about the custom accessing? So like, say I'm a Telstra customer.
No, I'm talking about the internal users.
The internal users,
So
yeah.
that will be mapped in the third one?
It'll be here, yes, yeah. So it'll be, they're signing in either from the local network or they're signing in there, but they could be accessing the backend version of the portal of that.
So I've implemented the step-up stuff inside the MS system. How does that implement?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Step-up?
Yes, yeah.
Step-up MFA?
Step up MFA, yes.
So it requires that all the users are set up with MFA.
Yes.
Basically, they're only being prompted in risky scenarios. How does that fit in?
Right, so you can have a prompt when a risky sign-in happens, but you should also make sure that the initial sign-in was done with an MFA. So for example, I can talk about Azure AD because that's what I know.
I'm actually specifically, I'm talking about Azure AD.
Right,
So all
okay.
my users have
Yeah,
configured for MFA. I'm
MFA.
leveraging step-up for the users.
to do it.
Level 3 for the super users.
Yeah, so that's good. So
But the step up fit in 2 or 1?
if you're doing, so are you doing, you're not requiring MFA when they just sign in for non-privileged work?
Well, if they're signing in from an unknown device
Yeah.
or a risky situation or anything like that, then they're
Yeah.
automatically stepped up.
Right, so for ACSC to get to ML2, you need to have MFA regardless, not based on risk-based signing, you have to have MFA. For risk-based signing, you can do an additional MFA if you want at that point. That's good, but that's not covered by the ACSC essentially. If you want to say you're at ML1, to get to ML1, you have to apply regardless of risk. You have to do the MFA. So what I would recommend is to have both. So you should do MFA all the time and also have the risk-based policy to prompt MFA. Like someone stole the token and then they're using it, that will block that sort of attack with the risk-based policy. So you should have both of them.
Can you explain the difference between a two-step authentication versus two-factor?
Yes, so the ACSC does call out that, right? So 2 steps. So some people think, let me have VPN, and then you get into your VPN, and then I can access everything through the VPN. So I don't need to, set up MFA protection for all of those apps. So the ACSC defines that as a 2-step. So you're getting into one with a factor, and then relying on that to protect other sign-ins. So that is not a valid sign-in. So 2-factor means this particular app, at the time of signing, you need to know that the person did a 2-factor authentication. It's not like they did one step to get into the VPN and then a username password for the other app. That's a 2-step authentication. It's not a 2-factor.